Well, all right, we've got top of the hour here today. It looks like I am not on mute, so I hope everyone can hear me. And I do see our guest speaker today, Joseph Clark, is here, and the presentation should be viewable on your screen where you're at. I'm Melissa Hanson. I am co-coordinator along with Karen Weichert of the monthly Hot Topics series for the League of Women Voters, and thank you all for being here today. Joseph had, we had originally intended to bring him in May, but something unplanned for came up, and so here he is today for our June 7th gathering of the Hot Topics. We are recording this meeting, and it will be available on our website shortly after, perhaps not today, I know, but at some point next week, you'll be able to view the recording or share it, point people to the recording if they were not able to attend today. So Joseph comes to us from the Oasis Center in Midtown Nashville. They've got a lot of programs there. One that is particularly dear to my heart, and was how I met Joseph, was through the Just Us program that helps support Middle Tennessee and beyond now, LGBTQ plus youth who are in such need of support and services. So, but there's a whole lot of other things going on there too. So I'm going to just turn it over to Joseph, and we'll have the next, hour or so to talk, and he'll take your questions, and we'll take it away, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. My name is Joseph Clark. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the director of Just Us over here at Oasis Center. Just Us is a collection of positive youth development programs and mental health services that specifically focus on LGBTQ plus young people. To this day, we are still the only full-time staffed and intentional positive youth development programming for LGBTQ plus young people in the state of Tennessee. And really the only intentional youth programming for LGBTQ plus young people in the Mid-South region. So my goal today for our little bit of time together is I'm going to share with you all currently kind of a state of LGBTQ plus young people. I know previously we were going to chat about the state of Tennessee Children Report Card, and I can say that almost every single program that Oasis Center offers does somehow support improving those outcomes for every young person that is experiencing perhaps the not great outcomes that are reflected in that report card currently. The report card does not get into LGBTQ plus specific identities, which is a bit unfortunate because, as we know, especially in this state, outcomes across the board in terms of mental health, school completion, homelessness, all of that stuff are exponentially worse for LGBTQ plus young people. And even just quickly glancing over the report card as a youth worker, it feels as a whole, outcomes for all young people in Tennessee right now are not exceptional or ideal, especially the more marginalized that they are. So we will start kind of on the LGBTQ focus lens, and I will share with you all what Oasis Center does to support young people, though especially those that are susceptible and at much higher risk from learning, growing, and thriving in their communities. So there we go. It does work. Perfect. So this has a bit of a content warning on the next few slides that I'm going to share with you, in that outcomes right now for LGBTQ plus young people in schools, especially in public schools, are not great. Things are going off the rails all the time right now, especially in our state where we're seeing such an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ legislation leveraged at particularly young people. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to be an adolescent first and foremost. And it's even harder when you have a marginalized identity. This set of data that I'm going to share with you is high quality data. It is from the GLSEN School Climate Survey 2021. This has been disseminated to public high schools across the country, and it is kind of a tell-all of what are LGBTQ plus students experiencing. It can be done paper form or it can be done electronically, but I do want to say it does come with a bit of disclaimer that if a young person is in a space where they have access to completing this survey, they may be coming from a more open and affirming environment to be willing to go through this. And on top of that, as we see with a lot of young people, especially those with marginalized identities and LGBTQ plus identities, just because questions are asked does not mean they're answered accurately or truthfully. So some of this data could actually be underreported. I also have a bit of data to share with you that comes right from Metro Nashville Public Schools Youth Risk Behavior Survey, both in 2019 and 2021. I know we are in 2024 right now, but those are the most current sets of data and reports that we have. They're kind of done as like a census, and so we will be getting the 2023 data probably in the fall of this year from both of those sets of surveys. So as a whole, when we look at public school climate, and this does not take into account private schools anywhere, but as public school, high school climate for LGBTQ plus students, 68% of our high schoolers feel unsafe at school because of some facet of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or their gender expression. And within that, 50.6% of students feel unsafe at school specifically because of their sexual orientation. And when we talk about this concept of safety, it really encompasses physical safety, emotional safety, and mental safety. All three of those things taken into account. 58% of our high school students reported hearing homophobic remarks from teachers or other school staff. And this can be a direct statement to a young person from an adult in that school building. It can be an adult addressing a group of people or a classroom of students, or it can be a student overhearing an adult in passing. Let's say the student is walking down the hallway and this is a conversation overheard from like a teacher's lounge or a classroom sort of situation. And the concept of adult staff, teachers or school staff, is not just direct educators, it's every adult in that building. So it is front office staff, it is the lunchroom volunteer, perhaps the crossing guard that is in the intersection right outside of that school building. All of those people get factored into this concept of adult school staff. And what is interesting about this is this statistic is up a bit, at up 5.6% from 2019. And so this data was collected during COVID, when much of schools were shut down or we were in a virtual space. And so there was less opportunity for that exposure, but somehow the incident increased significantly. 72% of students reported hearing negative remarks about gender expression from teachers or other school staff. And this is outside of like a school dress code sort of thing. This can really be length of hair, colors, patterns, prints, just overall expression of that young person, where this is being directly tied to some form of slur or remark that is homophobic or anti-LGBTQ plus in nature. And again, this is up 5.3% from 2019. So less exposure, but higher incident. In schools, 69.6% of high school students who experienced harassment or assault let me take a step back. 69.6% of LGBTQ plus students experienced harassment or physical assault in school at some point throughout that school year. And of those that experienced it, 61.5% did not make a report to any adult in that school building. Those who did make a report after having experienced harassment or assault, 60.3% went on to say that school staff did nothing or they were told to ignore it. So there was no resolution for our children who are experiencing harassment or in some cases physical assault. They're just going on or expected to return to their normal day. When we look at the school state snapshot from the GLSEN School Climate Report, anti-LGBTQ plus harassment and assault in Tennessee schools is fairly high across the board. First of all, we don't really want to think that any child in a school is experiencing harassment or assault. That's not the intent of schools, right? School is meant for a place for students to learn, grow, and thrive and find community and connectivity, not to experience harassment and assault. But when we look at some of these statistics with verbal assault topping over 50% of our LGBTQ plus students, then looking at physical harassment in that 27% of our LGBTQ plus students are experiencing physical harassment because of their sexual orientation. And 21% are experiencing physical harassment because of their expression, and 23% are experiencing physical harassment because of their gender. And again, these could also be underreported because students just are not reporting that information based off of the previous slide, that there is a fear of reporting if nothing's going to come from it or if there's not going to be a resolution to it. The GLSEN School Climate Survey found that 32.2% of LGBTQ plus students missed at least one entire day of school in the past month. And the Metro Nashville Public Schools Youth Risk Behavior Survey found that number to be significantly higher, in that 48.3% of LGBTQ plus students did not go to school at least one day because they didn't feel safe at school or on their way to school. And this can be walking to school, school bus, or city bus, whatever mode of transportation they use to get there. And when we take this into account, this adds up to a truancy charge very, very quickly, especially within MNPS, which has a low threshold for absenteeism and can very much turn over to the attendance court pretty rapidly. And so when we think of that, the Student Attendance Center is not in an accessible space. It is somewhat removed from the metropolitan area. It is in East Nashville. It is across from the East Nashville Police Precinct, and it's behind like the recycling center, the electronic toxic waste sort of recycling center. So it's just not even in a great spot, but it is also not off of a major bus line. And so thinking of that, if we have a young person who now is finding themselves at risk for truancy court because school was not safe, and now they are expected to show up to the attendance center, and they're coming from a household where parents perhaps don't have transportation, or perhaps share a car, or perhaps don't have childcare or access to a bus, what we find is that becomes a very messy situation very, very quickly, where we tend to see that young person then being put out of the house because they're too difficult now to quote unquote manage or deal with. We find that young person just really being turned over to the juvenile justice system and perhaps a stay within the juvenile detention center, all because they were experiencing physical assault or verbal harassment at school, which is largely out of their control. 76% or 3 in 4 students experienced at least one form of anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination at school during the past year. And when we look at anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination and what that actually means, 59% of transgender students were prevented from using their chosen name or pronouns, specifically that chosen name that is not being honored when it is being honored for students who do not have a trans identity. And the example to that is my legal name, my birth name is Joseph, and in school I went by Joe, and that was fine. There was no questions asked about that. But for our trans students who perhaps have a legal name of Joseph and want to go by a name such as Jane, it is not being honored. 71% of transgender students were unable to use a bathroom aligned with their gender. What we find is many of our young people actually now, or trans young people, do go the entire school day without using the bathroom at all, because they don't have access to a bathroom that aligns with who they are and their gender identity. And if we think about that, how uncomfortable that must be to not use a bathroom for an entire school day. And that can lead to some pretty major health consequences pretty quickly too. 43% of our LGBTQ plus students are disciplined for PDA that did not result in similar action for non-LGBTQ plus students. And that simply just looks like holding hands with a partner in the hallway in between classes, or having a same gender, same sex date to like the homecoming dance or the prom. 22% were prevented from forming or promoting a GSA, which is a gender and sexuality alliance or a gay straight alliance. 12% were prevented or discouraged from playing school sports due to an LGBTQ plus identity. And then 6% were disciplined at school for identifying as LGBTQ plus. So there was some actual disciplinary action because they have an LGBTQ plus identity. And that typically looks like just being chalked up to being a distraction, that they're distracting somebody in school or somebody in the class, preventing that person from learning. So now that person is being written up or referred to the principal's office or receiving detention. Within MNPS, 60.1% of LGBTQ plus students strongly disagree, or are not sure that in their community they feel like they matter to people. And I think that's a really jarring number for a child, or for us to take into consideration that 60% of our children feel like they don't matter to anybody in their community. 28.4% would not feel comfortable seeking help from adults if they had an important question affecting their life. And that just means anything, especially for a high schooler. Almost every question a high schooler could ask is an important question affecting their lives. And this ranges from access to mental health support and community supportive programs up into college applications and FAFSA support. And can you proofread my personal statement before I send it off with my college application? And on top of that, 51% of our LGBTQ plus high schoolers sometimes, rarely, or never feel safe and secure at school. And again, that really is the intention of school. It is for students to feel safe and secure so that they can ultimately be in a place where they're learning, growing, and thriving. LGBTQ plus teens are 6 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression than the general population. And this is not just like that teen angst where today's so terrible, they failed the AP bio exam. That's not that sort of thing. This is clinically diagnosable depression that does require mental health intervention and support. This ultimately leads to LGBTQ plus young people being 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, experience suicidal thoughts, or engage in self-harm than heterosexual youth. And on average, these self-harm attempts are much more severe and require much more critical healthcare and intervention. When MNPS asked their students, heterosexual youth and LGBTQ plus youth, around feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, despair, depression, all those sorts of things, we don't want to think really that a child feels they are so desperate and that it is so bleak that they do not see it ever getting better. We don't want to think any person is ever in that position, right? But our LGBTQ plus youth reported rates at double and triple that around feelings of despair and suicidality compared to their heterosexual peers, especially that second to last line on the bottom of this chart. 5.8% heterosexual youth reported having attempted suicide once or more during the past 12 months. And that was significantly higher at 26.5% of LGBTQ plus youth in MNPS having reported a suicide attempt, at least one suicide attempt in the last 12 months. And again, this may also be underreported because that would require extreme vulnerability to report out on a survey that you have experienced self-harm or suicidality, right? And so there may be an entire chunk of young people who are falling through the cracks and we don't have accurate numbers for when we consider this. And the bottom line of clinical treatment, 1.4% of heterosexual youth received some form of mental health support or clinical treatment, and 8.2% of LGBTQ plus youth were able to receive clinical treatment and mental health support. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that it is long-term or within a continuum of care. It really could have just been an immediate crisis, mobile crisis within that moment to meet that direct need. And then that young person wasn't ever connected with an ongoing therapist from there. Looking at the Trevor Project's 2024 US National Survey on Mental Health of LGBTQ plus young people, among all LGBTQ plus young people, 84% want mental health care support. 84% of our LGBTQ plus youth want it and they understand that they need mental health services. And of that, 50% of LGBTQ plus young people who wanted mental health care in the past year were not able to get it for a variety of reasons. We typically don't trust young people that they know best for themselves. As adults, we don't listen to them and we don't believe them. Mental health care is very expensive and often not covered by most insurances. And mental health care is not just a one-time appointment, right? It requires routine follow-up care that can last for several years depending on the need of that young person. And so those are all incredibly high barriers or obstacles to receiving services. LGBTQ plus teens are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than their non-LGBTQ plus peers. And this is a variety of factors. This is from school rejection. This can be from familial rejection. Here in Tennessee, there is also a layer of religious rejection too that plays into this factor. And when we take into consideration this concept of homelessness, having your friend let you crash at their house for a couple of weekends or sleep on their couch or have an extended sleepover is not stable and secure housing. Young people need stable and secure housing within a dwelling that is managed by a legal guardian, their legal guardian, not just their best friend's parent or anything like that. And the percentage of youth experiencing homelessness who identifies LGBTQ+, this number is accurate through nationwide, but also what we see here in Davidson County is about 40% of the young adult population who is experiencing homelessness has an LGBTQ+ identity. And then just a few more stats to throw at you. This was a survey that was open-ended. The first question was, do you have an LGBTQ+ identity? Yes or no? And then it was open-ended in what are your major top concerns for your senior year of high school? And non-LGBTQ+ youth reported that their top concerns for their senior year of high school were classes, exams, and grades, college and career, and financial pressures. Specifically, those financial pressures related to college and career. Could they afford to go away? Did it make best sense to go away to a 4-year university or perhaps a 2-year program? Made better sense for right now. When we look at LGBTQ+ youth and their top concerns for their senior year of high school, they're concerned about unaccepting families, which we see in that statistic around homelessness. They're concerned about school and bullying problems, which we saw in those harassment and assault numbers. And they have a fear of being out and or open, that they are not showing up to school wholly and authentically. They can't share who they are, and they are not receiving access to services. Our non-LGBTQ+ youth concerns are what we expect for high school seniors, right? We expect them to be concerned about grades and classes and exams. We expect them to have some anxiety and some nervousness around those AP exams and those college applications. And are they ready to move away from home and embark on a new adventure? They are in a much more thriving space. Our LGBTQ+ youth are really concerned with just getting through the day, the week, or perhaps the semester, and they are in a much more surviving space. And within our LGBTQ+ young people, there's kind of like a great divide as well, in that for some, home is the safe space. They don't like school at all. It is not safe. They do not have connection to community. They do not have peers or adults that support them. And so right now that it's summer break, they love being home. This is great. Summer break cannot last long enough. For others, home is the terrible space. And school was their safe space. They had those peer connections. They had those adult relationships that are productive and supportive. And they cannot wait to get back into school. Summer is absolutely terrible for them. When we look at Tennessee through a legislative lens at the moment, Tennessee overall throughout the country, 484 anti-LGBTQ+ bills were introduced in 2024, with Tennessee really leading the pack in that and having some of the most harsh and strictest, and in some cases, some of the most violent anti-LGBTQ+ legislation that we've seen in the country. Tennessee introduced 40 bills this past legislative session that range from things such as drag bans to healthcare restrictions and bans, into curriculum censorship, religious exemptions around marriage, adoption, foster care placement, or healthcare again, participation in sports, and forced outing in schools, where adult educators would be obligated to share with parents if a young person disclosed a facet of LGBTQ plus identity to an educator in that building. There was, I don't even know if this is a silver lining or a glimmer of hope, but Tennessee did have a pro LGBTQ plus bill in 2024. We had one, and it was introduced to create a proclamation for Trans Day of Visibility. And unfortunately, that was introduced after Trans Day of Visibility had already passed. So it almost kind of feels like not even a Band-Aid on a hemorrhaging wound at the moment. So what do we do with all that now? That is what the state for LGBTQ plus young people looks like, both in Tennessee and through a national lens. Here at the Oasis Center within Just Us, we have programs to specifically address the needs of LGBTQ plus young people. Our two flagship programs are Just Us, which is for high school students, and Becoming Us, which is for middle school students. Those meet during the school year. They're built on a foundation of positive youth development and create a space for LGBTQ plus young people to just be exactly who they are. For so many of our young people, they don't have access to visibility or representation. They don't have access to awareness or support. And so we bring that in and offer that to them to create a space where they can first and foremost explore their identities, but then ultimately celebrate their identities for who they are, while connecting them to college and career opportunities, service learning, community-based enrichment. For many of our LGBTQ plus young students, they are homeschooled because school is not a safe space for them. And as soon as we take a student out of school, we cut off a significant portion of their access to socialization and social services and just community offerings. And so within Just Us and Becoming Us, we want to create a space where they are learning about things they may not even know exist here in Nashville or in Davidson County. There are no qualifiers to join either of those programs other than to be an LGBTQ plus student and be within one of those age ranges, high school or middle school. We also have Students of Stonewall, which is a year-long internship for high school juniors and seniors. They go through an application and interview process, and then they spend a year learning about LGBTQ plus terminology, identities, policy, that sort of thing. And then they go out into the community and they facilitate roundtable conversations on how to be more open and affirming and respectful towards LGBTQ plus people, using their knowledge, but ultimately using their lived LGBTQ plus youth experience. We have mental health support here at Oasis Center, also through Just Us. We have an LGBTQ plus identified therapist who works specifically with LGBTQ plus students and their families. It's intake and appointment based. It is individual therapy. We have some young people that come once a month. We have some people that come every other week. We have some people that come once a week and really work through those mental health issues with our therapist. We also have small group therapy and family therapy for young people that need that as well. That's how we're supporting specifically LGBTQ plus young people through a direct service lens to kind of shift the needle and create more open and affirming spaces for Middle Tennessee, for Tennessee as a whole. I am very much ingrained in system level change through our equity-driven initiative, which conversations like this are a part of. Working with school counselors in public school systems across the state, and specifically within MNPS, we developed a certified LGBTQ plus equity and inclusion specialist training. It was developed by counselors and then delivered by peer-to-peer counselors. We thought that would be the most impactful way to deliver the information. But this is to train mental health providers in school settings with those actual tangible tools on how they can support their LGBTQ plus students and get them connected to deeper and much more long-standing sustainable mental health care. I've also worked very closely with MNPS through a grant from the CDC, starting with 14 identified schools, and it has since expanded to ensure that every adult in that building knows how to best support LGBTQ plus students and create open and affirming spaces through the use of chosen name or pronouns or visibility and access to awareness and that sort of thing. We also work closely with the foster care system, making sure that families and parents are best equipped to take an LGBTQ plus student or young person into their foster care. Because as we see, LGBTQ plus students have an overrepresentation in the foster care system, and they are probably in the foster care system because of their LGBTQ plus identity. That's why they've been displaced from their home. I've also worked with the juvenile justice system to help write their new higher orientation for their staff, reevaluate their code of conduct policy, and make sure that even if we are finding LGBTQ plus students in the juvenile justice system, we are minimizing as much stress as we possibly can for them during their stay there. And coming up, which I'm incredibly excited to take on, is an open and affirming school library training. So this was disseminated to the 13 state regions, the state public school library regions in Tennessee. 12 of the 13 gave input. This ranged from more metropolitan public school libraries to incredibly rural school libraries, but they gave their information and their responses and ultimately their needs on what do they need to create their public school library to be open and affirming and get those books, get that curriculum, get that information to their LGBTQ plus students. That's what Just Us has going on. And so that very specifically works on for LGBTQ plus students. Oasis Center as a whole is an open and affirming agency, and we have a ton of crossover with our other programs within our LGBTQ plus realm, but then with our students who are just living in Middle Tennessee. Our services range from crisis intervention to community engagement onto college and career access, and we have over 20 programs at any given time during the year. Our two primary focuses are action, advocacy, and education. That's where the majority of the Just Us programming lives, but also crisis to housing initiatives too, which is a continuum of programs and services focused on helping youth, particularly those that are experiencing homelessness or at a low income threshold, and at-risk youth secure housing, employment, and long-term self-sufficiency and stability. And then we can connect a lot of this to the report card as well, especially when we look at young people who are experiencing involvement in juvenile justice and such. We have a program called Reaching Excellence as Leaders, or the REAL program. It is a 13-week program for those who are experienced with the juvenile justice system or at risk of becoming involved with the juvenile justice system, ultimately as a court diversion program. What can we do for this young person to connect them to their community, build those self-sufficiency and autonomy and efficacy skills, ultimately avoiding the juvenile justice detention center. Our programs are on a foundation of Lyman's Teen Outreach Program, but we also have a crew here, a team here that goes into congregate care homes serving foster care adolescents and youth and juvenile detention centers and trains those adults how to work with students who are experiencing crisis. It is through a trauma-informed care lens, a positive youth development lens, so that when those young people are in foster care homes or in the juvenile justice system, regardless of their identity, the adults that are working with them are implementing best practices to really protect their mental health, but make sure that we are not keeping our young people wrapped up in these systems that are incredibly difficult to break out of. We have an international teen outreach program here as well. This is designed for immigrant and refugee students within MNPS schools, especially those MNPS schools that have higher student populations of immigrants and refugees. Is evidence-based program that combines in-school activities to celebrate and maintain their culture, their heritage, their traditions, all that sort of stuff, and couples that with out-of-school service learning and enrichment opportunities. One of our largest programs as a whole here at Oasis Center is College Connection. We have a team of college mentors who facilitate the college going process with these students. The majority of these students that are in Oasis College Connection or receive College Connection services are first-generation Americans, are low-income Americans, or also first-generation college-going students. And so we work very hard to make sure that whatever their next step is, they're best prepared for. Does that school make best sense for them financially, socially, mentally, academically? Is it a four-year school? Is it moving away? Is it perhaps staying local and starting off at Nashville State? And because we thought that was so important, At the Nashville State campuses here, we do have student success mentors placed so that once they leave high school and if they go on to Nashville State, they can stay connected to an OASIS staff person and make sure their needs are still being met and that they are still set up for as much success as possible. And for some of our young people, it looks like access to a bus pass. It looks like access to an alarm clock so that they can have an alarm clock set for them to wake up early enough to get on the bus and make their 8 a.m. class. For some that are young parents, it looks like access to EBT, WIC, whatever the case may be, so that they can continue to parent their child, but also continue to be successful in that school, that program that they are working through academically. Those are more of our youth engagement focused programs. And now this is a bit of information on our crisis to housing services. We do have an emergency shelter here on site at the OASIS Center. It is a short-term residential program for young people who are 13 to 17 years old who may be experiencing homelessness or may be at the risk of homelessness, or for whatever reason, home is just not a safe space for them. So it is a voluntary program. They come here, they have access to mental health support, individual therapy, small group therapy. During the school year, we have access to a Metro Nashville Public School liaison so they can maintain their schoolwork too, and they aren't marked as absent or while they're trying to receive mental health care and a respite from their housing or from their home situation. Our emergency shelter is the only youth crisis shelter in the state of Tennessee. And so it is not uncommon for young people to come from outside of Davidson County needing access to our emergency shelter services. With our emergency shelter, we also have a 24/7 crisis hotline that young people experiencing any sort of crisis can call and talk to a real person. It's not automated. It is a real trained mental health provider on the other end of that phone to be able to speak with a young person and walk them through whatever crisis they're experiencing within that moment. Outside of Just Us, we also have an entire clinical counseling team. And so our staff provides mental health services to any young person who needs access to therapy services. On site, we also have an outreach center here. This is for young adults who are 18 to 24 who are experiencing unstable living conditions or homelessness. They can use our address to receive mail. They have access to internet for email, that sort of thing. They have access to case managers. We have a kitchen with a food pantry. They have access to wash machines, dryers. They have access to showers. They also have access to a warm bed so that they can sleep. For many young people experiencing homelessness, they don't sleep at night because it's not safe to fall asleep on the streets. There's risks of being robbed or mugged or assaulted. And so they stay awake all night long. And then they come here during the day so that they can get sleep. But through that, we also want to connect them to our rapid rehousing program so that they are not just left to sleep on the streets or experiencing homelessness. And our rapid rehousing program is exactly that. We want to rapidly rehouse these people, these young people, and provide rental assistance and case management through wraparound services, where they eventually then become autonomous in being able to support and sustain their own homes. Throughout the course of any given year, OASIS Center supports nearly 3,500 at-risk youth in Middle Tennessee. And we really see that now, our reach stretching beyond just Nashville and Davidson County, and really even further than Williamson County, Wilson County, and Rutherford County. For Just Us, it was not uncommon for us to have young people to travel in from Cookeville to attend one of our meetings. They were on the road longer to come to one of our support groups than they spent in the support group itself. When we transitioned our programs to an online space during COVID, it removed a huge barrier to access for our young people. And now anyone who had access to a tablet, a cell phone, a computer could electronically join our support groups. And we were really connecting with young people who were in some of those incredibly rural parts of the state. But not only that, we were able to connect with young people who were in the Mid-South region and had young people from Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, and Arkansas joining our groups. So when we look at that, that's how OASIS supports through a continuum of care, wraparound services, and provides a multitude of opportunities for our young people who have some of those incredibly adverse and negative outcomes that we see reflected in the Tennessee State Report Card. That's the information I have for you all, and that was a ton of information in just a short time.
Yes. And maybe we all need a moment of reflection. First, Joseph, I want to thank you very much for coming and talking about this with us. And it's very painful personally, I know, for myself to see as we say, the barriers, the bottlenecks, the stress points facing so many of our youth, regardless of their situation, and particularly for our LGBTQ plus youth, going up against the very, I'll say it, hostile environment that the Tennessee legislature has put in place.
Mhm.
And it's particularly for Pride Month, as it is here in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. Pride does kind of convey this sense of celebration and uplift, and moments of positivity. But it's also, I think, for all of us to recognize that it's not just certainly the triumphs are necessary and need to be celebrated, but we also really need to take a look in action. Our gay youth are in trouble. They are troubled. They are, children facing, adult based adult learned and transposed behaviors that will impact them for the rest of their lives. So the sobering side of Pride really is a moment for reflection for all of us who care about, social justice, economic justice, racial justice, informed voter and electorate. All of these things make a difference for us. And I appreciate you sharing all of this information that, while depressing, I think we all need to be aware of in order to really place some context around what personal beliefs or actions that we all might take. Are there any questions from anyone in the group? Anyone? Yes, we've got Meg.
Hi. First, I'm just blown away by all that you're doing and so appreciative of what you're providing as a resource for the community. I know my best friend would have been incredibly grateful if they had been able to take advantage of your programs when they were young. With the Just Us and Becoming Us, the school day weekly programs, are those available remotely for people that are not in Davidson?
So unfortunately, they are not. We will be dissolving our online programming at the end of this month. We were using Discord, and Discord through the Apple Store has raised their minimum age requirement to 17. It was previously 13, and now we are no longer able to take new young people into our programs, into our servers. But we are working and we're trying to partner with other organizations that have access to some sort of online chat space to be able to continue to offer that for our young people. It is very difficult to find a high quality and safe and secure online space. And for many of our young people, Zoom, they just don't want to be on camera and speaking. And so using a text-only chat feature was very beneficial for them. And they felt more comfortable doing that. So as of the end of this month, we will be dissolving our online remote programming, and we will only have in-person programming, and that is open to anyone that is able to access it we also understand there is a barrier within that. Not everybody can get to downtown Nashville on a weekday.
Thank you for answering. Thank you.
So, Joseph, I have a question for you about interaction with the foster care system, and we know that there are a lot of issues with child care, foster care, emergency placement services, and can you tell us if you have any information about, being able to be eligible for what's coming to mind actually is that there was a recent Tennessee action that allows foster care parents who are, volunteering in that system to be foster care parents, that they do not have to support, acknowledge, or provide for, or can, reject kids who may identify with one of the communities of the LGBTQ plus rainbow. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think, my opinion on why I don't understand why of all things that was what we had to focus on, especially when we look at how many kids are in the foster care system and need safe and secure foster placements, why we leveraged this right to refusal for LGBTQ plus identities. My hope within that is then people that don't want to foster and take in an LGBTQ plus young person just won't do that. But there are foster care agencies and there are foster families who are loving and supportive and affirming and want access to the information and are seeking out how best to serve their LGBTQ plus foster child. And so that feels more hopeful than this new legislation that came through on that. I mean, yeah, I guess we can all refuse to do anything we don't want to do. Typically, if I don't want to do it, I just don't. I don't need legislation then to tell me not to do it. And so with so much of this right now, there aren't clear answers. It is so muddy and gray. And it is that the hope that families and homes that want to be supportive of LGBTQ plus foster placements will get the knowledge, get the connection, get them connected to support groups. And those that don't want to take in an LGBTQ plus foster child, hopefully they just won't. And we also know there are just not great people in the foster care system across the board for any child, and people do it for probably sometimes not the best of reasons. But if you don't want to in this case, then just don't do it. And let the people that do want it, let them take care of it, if that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. And I also had a question about, you mentioned that you work with the MNPS via a CDC grant for training all the adults in the building to better serve or understand or increase awareness of the LGBTQ plus population of students. And you mentioned 14 schools. It started with that. There's more now. And like, what level are you seeing, like, a particular, like, say, for instance, I live in the Glencliff school district. So I've got an elementary and middle school and the high school, right, all on the same street. Do you get to, are you seeing that whole neighborhood schools, or is it more spotty with, maybe, Cane Ridge middle, but not the high school, or where do you see that program?
It is a bit spotty, unfortunately. When it started, it was 14 middle and high schools were identified through the CDC and MNPS as priority schools. And that also was priority not just for LGBTQ plus students, but for a multitude of other reasons, such as like free and reduced lunch, high English language populations, that sort of stuff. The CDC 1807 grant is much bigger than just my open and affirming trainings. It really goes into many of those components of
Okay.
all facets of an identity. And so it started with middle and high school schools. It did not include elementary. But then once it started to expand, there started to become an interest for the information and to get those educators within each of those schools. It was kind of a ripple effect. And so although there were 14 that were specifically needing to go through that program, it expanded to other schools just having an interest in it. And so we haven't been able to really get like a continuum of a direct feeder school of elementary, middle, and high school quite yet. But progress is progress and happening every day. And we've also been able to work with the transportation department and the school resource officer department and supportive staff departments too, to create like that wraparound of all the adults that that young person would have interaction with in a typical school time. But we're working on it, and it's kind of evolved into being like a 101 of sorts, and then developed into a deeper dive into some identities, and then more of, now that you've had the information, how can we tailor it specifically to your school and the population that you're working with, and what is working, what's not working, and what specific needs do you have? So it's been a very intentional rollout as well.
Yeah, great. That's good to hear. Anyone else have a question? We see Anne with their hand up.
Can you comment a little bit more on the library initiative that you mentioned? Are you having difficulties with acquiring a full range of appropriate materials? How's that working?
It's still in its early stages of conception, to be honest. And I'm really relying very heavily on the school librarians to share what their needs are and what they have access to. So far, there's been that one region that didn't respond at all. And I have no idea why. That could be a disinterest, or it could just be a time and capacity issue. But I'm relying heavily on what the librarians have access to, what the policies are within their school districts currently. What we've been seeing is there really aren't these deeply entrenched policies for book banning and book censorship. It really is kind of at this personal level of people just doing it and taking it upon themselves to pull books from shelves and from libraries. And so that kind of makes it easier to just then like circumvent that. If there's not a policy that says that book can't be available, then why isn't it available? And what we're working with the libraries on is kind of like, how do we, for some of the spaces that are on the verge of a book ban or book censorship, or not coming from the most affirming of school districts, how do we also make it subtle too? And there are a ton of ways to put and incorporate LGBTQ plus titles into a library much more subtly too. And then how do we kind of like code that out so that students and librarians and educators know what they're looking for? So as a whole, it's been more positive than not. There hasn't been a ton of pushback. There has really been that need of, we need this. Please help us do this, because we are so stretched anyway as a public school librarian that we can't do it ourselves.
Great, thank you. We only have a few minutes left. So I did want to kind of wrap this up with, Joseph, do you have, I know we had 40 bills proposed in Tennessee. Typically what we like to do is provide, some options or actions that our league members could do that would, like you see as priority issues, or, sponsors for bills, where we could place, our phone calls or letter writing. If you want to list any of that, or
Yeah,
know it off the top of your head, I'm sure you do have a few.
I think our biggest priorities through my lens as a youth worker are anything that just targets LGBTQ plus youth, especially trans youth, especially around access to gender affirming healthcare, because all of those procedures, that's still all available to anyone who's not seeking it for trans affirming support. And so finding a way to start chipping away at that block and dissolving that and getting back to where trans youth have access, because it really is life-saving gender affirming care. And also I would say a priority are these concepts of this like forced outings, where that if that information is shared with adults, then they have an obligation to share that with the parents. And that's going to have incredibly volatile and perhaps fatal consequences, to be honest. There are many, many young people who cannot share that information with their parents. And I'm not of the mindset that because that person birthed that child or is parenting that child, they have that immediate right to access of all the information around that child's identity. And I think forced outing at that level is going to be incredibly detrimental to LGBTQ plus mental health. And we will see a huge spike in suicidality and probably child abuse rates and homelessness and foster care placements, that sort of thing. So those are my two biggest priorities right now. And I always say, pick one and then pick that person you have a connection with and explain to them, even if you don't have an LGBTQ plus child, friend, or family member. It's one of those things is something doesn't need to happen to you for you to understand how it can impact somebody else. And just share that little bit of information. And I know there's so much out there. And when we think of 40 bills as a lot, there's no way that we can know all 40 of those bills and the specific nuanced writing within of them. Just pick one and just focus your energy on one. And that does tend to lead to several more. They're all interconnected. That would be my advice on how we start to advocate and approach, as Nashville especially is about to be in an election season for many positions. Pick one and go from there, because it can be really overwhelming.
Great. And we have a message in the chat about, is it possible, donations and yes, donations are always welcome. I can tell you and that, Oasis Center is a United Way recipient agency. And you can, if you're a United Way donor regularly, you can direct your donations to Oasis Center specifically, if you care to. And they do take, cash, financial donations. And maybe if you have a email address or a website, you could tell us that real quick.
Yeah, I can put my email in the chat. My email is jclark@oasiscenter.org. And our website is oasiscenter.org/donate. And you can designate a donation to any program that you want. You can designate it to Just Us if you want, or general operating funds throughout the agency. Donations really are what keeps our lights on. And keeps us afloat. Just Us as a whole has, I would say, about 80% of our budget is through private donations, individual gives, or small business fundraisers, that sort of thing, employee resource group kind of things. Now that we're in Pride Month, we are so fortunate to have incredible support from the community. And I want to plug as many small businesses always as possible. So if you're ever out and about during June and you see something contributes or goes to Just Us, or Just Us has been named as a beneficiary, go ahead and support that small business as well. We have things that support us, from yoga classes to coffee to t-shirts and everything in between. We have a ton of great community support. And we do need volunteers. Our volunteers typically in our youth programs look like long-term commitments that we ask people to be committed for at least a school year, but ideally up to 2 school years to maintain those relationships. And that information is found on our website too. You just go to the volunteer page and plug in your information. And Felicia, who is our volunteer manager, will send out newsletters as opportunities become available.
Great. And one last thing, do you still have the bike program, the bicycle shop?
Yes, we do still have the bike workshop. It is in our basement. It is an 8-week program where young people pick out a donated bike frame and learn how to refurbish it and build it and almost reinvent it and customize it to their needs. And now they have an independent mode of transportation that once they've rebuilt it, they learn how to maintain it. It comes with a bike lock, a helmet, and a toolkit, and they learn the laws to riding a bike in Davidson County on the greenways, the roads, the sidewalks, that sort of stuff. And I actually don't know if I mentioned it in my overview, all of our services, the bike workshop, everything Just Us does, and our therapy services, everything we offer at Oasis Center is free of charge. We don't take insurance, we don't have any sort of sliding scale fees, and we don't accept payments for any young person to have access to any of our services.
That's great. So that's why our donations are so important. They have licensed therapists. Of course, the staff that dedicates more than 40 hours a week, I'm sure, to the work and nights and weekends. And so I really appreciate, once again, you coming and sharing this information with us. It's the more you know, the better you are. So thank you, everyone, for attending today. And we'll see a write-up of this in the Voter. There is no July hot topic because of the holiday. So we traditionally every year take July off for a much needed break for everyone, because we do have that election season coming up in August and November. So let's we'll all take a break and we'll reconvene for our August meeting in about 8 weeks. So enjoy the summer, everyone. Thank you once again, Joseph. And
Thank you for
we'll see
having
you
me.
soon.
Bye,
Bye,
y'all.
everyone.